Hello, my name is Michał Wójcik and I would like to welcome you to a toolbox about budgets and finances for musicians. It has been created as a part of a larger course called Growth of Innovation, Development and Digitalization in the Music Business Professionals Education. It covers some basic concepts about budgeting and financing on an example of live concerts and tours. We invited 3 experts from different walks of their musical lives. A DIY artist, a countrywide concert booker and manager, and an international touring agency owner. They will share their ideas and some spreadsheet files with you. Sit back, relax, and have fun watching. Even though most of us aren't experts on it, virtually every musician has to take care of their own budgets. It is a must if you want to grow, especially that DIY budgets run on low margins where being careful can be critical. To paraphrase David Byrne, if you don't attend to your own business, soon you will have no business at all.
Działalność zespołu, poza tym, że jest działalnością artystyczną, jest też częścią prowadzenia biznesu. A skoro mówimy o biznesie, no to wiąże się to z rozliczeniami.
Budgeting is the key for artists and bands on international tours. It helps you to manage your money, avoiding overspreading on travels, accommodation, or shows production, or a crew, for example.
When I was in my first band, we were 7 people. And we were touring all around Poland. It was definitely a very intense time because we had within 1 year we played over 100 gigs. So we were good at booking, definitely. But I still don't think that it was a really good time when it comes to getting money.
Dlaczego rozpadają się zespoły? Często przez niewiedzę, bardzo często przez pieniądze. Dlatego uważam, że bardzo ważną rzeczą w funkcjonowaniu każdego zespołu jest przejrzystość w tym zakresie, żeby zawsze było wiadomo i każdy do tej wiedzy miał dostęp.
It also can impress the potential investors, showing that the tours is well planned, and this all ensures you have enough funds throughout the tour, and aids is planning future tours without financial problems.
First and the most important idea when it comes to budgeting is to be aware of the balance between income and expenses. It may sound silly to the more advanced of you, but very often an artist can be fueled by passion to an extent which makes this idea seem impossible to grasp. So first of all, think about what kind of expenses you have with your particular project.
We're talking transportation, sleeping. Will I have to sleep over in the place I'm going? Is anybody going to take care of that? And what is the estimated amount of money that I'm going to get for that? And it was just like, it would all happen in my head. I would not think about it twice.
After you think about it, I strongly recommend you to actually write it down. Simple budgets are, well, simple. But without putting it down on paper, it's easy to forget about some particular item.
My first way of budgeting was very lo-fi, and I still don't spend too much time on budgeting, but I do it slightly more methodically.
To są koszty, które są związane z hotelami, z wynajmem sali, z bardzo ważna rzecz, czyli podatkami i prowizjami, jeśli chodzi o wpływy z biletów. Koszty produkcji koncertu. Kolejną pozycją są honoraria. W przypadku honorariów ważne jest, żeby pamiętać, że tam trzeba uwzględnić koszty, które w związku z tym ponosimy. To znaczy, jeśli rozliczamy się z kimś na podstawie umowy o dzieło, to my za tę osobę musimy odprowadzić zaliczkę na podatek dochodowy. Jednym z ostatnich grup kosztów są koszty zespołowe i tam wrzucam wszystkie te rzeczy, które w jakiś sposób są ponoszone przez zespół wspólnie. Na przykład koszty takie jak wspólny obiad dla zespołu czy impreza po koncercie.
You're perhaps wondering, what about the income side of the equation? Consider it your sales plan. Try to predict and plan how much tickets, merch, or other sales you can generate and what number you're actually aiming at. Trying to forecast this as realistically as possible will allow you to make better decisions for your tours and projects.
By planning, you can predict your earning that comes from ticket sales and merchandise, guiding you on where you should perform or how big the show should be.
Albo są to wpływy w postaci honorarium, które jest z góry określone i rzecz jest najprostsza. Jeśli są to w jakiś sposób wpływy, które stanowią procent z biletów, no to ważne, żeby było gdzieś tam informacja o ilościach tych biletów, ich cenach i tak dalej.
Okay, so now is the juicy stuff. I'm right now in the middle of my tour that is promoting my debut album. So for example, the first one is over 1,000 zloty and that was a hat. So sometimes that happens. And then you have a hat that is just 300, and then you have a contract that was for the tickets, and it was, as you can see, not even 400 zloty, but it was quite a lot of CDs were sold.
Gdy odliczymy już wszystkie koszty we wszystkich grupach, no to wtedy zostaje nam podsumowanie. Czyli mamy wszystkie wpływy, wszystkie koszty. My, zanim się podzielimy tym, co zostanie, robimy jeszcze odpis na taki fundusz zespołowy, z którego są finansowane różne nasze wspólne potrzeby. No i dopiero potem zostaje kwota, która już po odliczeniu wszystkich kosztów jest tą kwotą do podziału. I następnie, ponieważ nas, wspólników jest 7, to dzielimy na 7.
I wanted to share with you my posting Excel. It's just like regular example how I do the budgeting. Whatever it's event, promotion of the event that I do or a touring. So in the beginning of the table, you see the main information that you need to know to keep on track what budget we are talking about. Then it's important to know the capacity of the venue, because if you have a sold out show, so you know what is like the revenue of ticket sales you might have. The next one, we have production costs that certain events on a tour might have. Then we have travel and transport costs, so international travel related to flights, ferry, trains maybe, internal, it depends if you need to rent the bus, for example, extra.
In taking notes of your incomes and expenses, there is one important thing to take into consideration, and that is taxes. The downside of taxes is that less money gets directly in your hands, and also the administration is more complicated. But if you want to be serious about it and do it sustainably, you will have to legalize your work and pay taxes sooner or later.
As an example, in Estonia, you pay 22 out from the ticket sales. So when the promoter get you the numbers from a ticket sales, they need to take down 22%.
Zmiany w systemie podatkowym, a ostatnio w naszym kraju potrafiły zachodzić niespodziewanie i nawet w środku roku podatkowego, co się wcześniej nie zdarzało. Więc tutaj trzeba być czujnym.
If you have international tours, to have a tax expert, ensure that everything is handled right. Because every country has their specific taxes on, for example, on, for example, accommodation. So even in Italy, each city has like different tax on accommodation. Then, for example, there's different rules in the European Union on ticket sales. And if you don't know, you might be, you might have problems.
There's this running joke. Who's an artist? It's a person who can, for a long time, live off the money she or he is expecting. So, here's yet another, more advanced idea in managing your budgets, and that is cash flow. The lack of understanding of this concept bankrupted quite a few seemingly successful artists, and is especially important if you are a DIY musician living on small margins.
So the next question is difference between account and cash flow. So account in international music tours refers to the recording of all financial transactions, including income from ticket sales, merchandise, and expenses like travel, venue costs, and salaries. It's comprehensive view on a tour, financial health, and the cash flow, on the other hand, focus on movements of the money in and out. Highlighting when and how cash is received and spent, and this is crucial for ensuring there's enough of money on hand to cover immediate expenses. And undertaking both is vital because good accounting helps you to see if the tour is profitable overall, while managing cash flow ensures you can pay bill on the tour on time and avoid running out of money in the middle of the tour. So essentially, accounts gives you the big picture, and the cash flow keeps you running day to day.
So the fact that you just received a big advance payment doesn't mean you can spend it all on insubstantial things, because soon enough you will have no resources left. Cash flow management is the key to avoid such situations. Like with the taxes, if you want to treat your job as a musician seriously and do it in a sustainable way, you may think about some form of a business entity or some tools available for private persons, such as contracts. Be aware that while specific tools may vary from country to country, the idea stays the same. They offer different kinds of solutions in terms of administration, taxes, healthcare, and the retirement plan, if any.
Z jakich form działalności mogą korzystać artyści? No, to zależy od tego, jak często koncertują, jak dużo grają. Jeśli tych koncertów gramy niewiele, najwygodniejszą, najlepszą formą rozliczania się przez artystów, nawet jeśli jest to zespół, który liczy więcej osób, jest umowa o dzieło.
First place I worked at was a lawyer's office, so definitely everything was top notch when it comes to contracting and so on.
Jeśli koncertów gramy więcej, jeśli skala funkcjonowania zespołu się rozrosła, wówczas warto się zastanowić nad założeniem działalności i tutaj zdecydowanie najprostszą formą jest jednoosobowa działalność gospodarcza.
You can prepare invoices for concerts. Some of the owners of the venues actually prefer it.
Again, and I can't stress that enough, it is crucial to take care of your budget if you are an aspiring musician and really plan on betting on that card. It is a highly competitive market, and it is crucial to be in control of the finances if you think about making a sustainable career for yourself. Hopefully, the toolbox you just watched will inspire you to do further research, and your budgets will become better and better. Good luck to you, and see you in the next toolbox.